Hello, everybody. Welcome back. This is another episode with Scott, and I think we're just going to keep continuing doing these episodes as well as the upcoming other special guest episodes. So, yeah, that's about it, and I hope you enjoyed the episode. Cheers, guys. Okay, so I guess what I'll note first is that last time we actually went on for a really, really long time. And was supposed to be the longest episode. And if people will go back and look, the duration, it actually did end up being the longest one. And so we went on for a long time. What happened was, and if anybody's upset about this, they can take it up with, they can go pick a fight with Spotify, or they can go get mad at our editor. And so if they want to fly to Australia and pick a fight with our editor, Tracy, they can.
Yeah, good luck with that.
They can do that. But I guess our file ended up being so long that it wouldn't upload. It was too long. And so our audience missed out on the opening talk that we had about when we were rambling on about the police and Stevie Wonder and other stuff. So that got cut out. So from now on, I guess we can't, we can only get carried away so much. So I think we have to be a little more, before we thought, well, we'll see, maybe we'll go on for like an hour and a half.
We didn't think that
and then last time we ended up just going on for 3 hours. I think we have to do a hard stop at around 2.5 hours now at this point, just in case. So, so yeah, if you wanted to hear us talk about the police, I guess everybody, you're shit out of luck. You missed
the
out.
Band.
We're sorry.
Band,
yeah, not the people in uniforms and with cars and stuff. We're staying in company.
Right.
Yeah. So anyway, so yeah, we've actually been talking for quite a bit, and then we decided that we should actually hit record and actually do an episode for everybody. And so we were going on about the escalating tensions between the US government and the Chinese government in Beijing. And then that got us to one of the main things that we wanted to talk about with the supply and labor issues or shortages that are going on at this point. So where did we leave off there?
Oh man, we left off at it's still to my mind at least in part a mystery as to why we're having a labor shortage. The supply shortage seems pretty obvious to me, where it's coming at us from all directions. We got supply shortages on the import channel just because of COVID disrupted, just directly related to COVID. And then we got ripple effects of backed up trucks, not enough containers, full dockyards, not enough truck drivers, et cetera, which just kind of pile on and pile on and pile on. And I would think under normal circumstances, that sort of stuff would resolve in the matter of a year. But what seems to be persistent, even after unemployment checks have stopped flowing for almost 6 months now, is that there's just not enough people, or there's too many jobs and not enough people. And at least in the US, we're not used to that situation. And it's causing prices to go up, and shortages in things like burgers and tacos and fried chicken.
So how much do you, I got a billion things to ask you. Maybe not quite a billion, well over a dozen. Now, one thing politically, and you'll see this, I see this here from some right-wing politicians, but it's just sort of a general meme on the right. It really blows up through social media and just people jumping to conclusions. But the first thing that people jump on with the inflation was the quantitative easing. And so how much is that actually having an effect, do you think, on the inflation, or is it more so everything else that's causing the inflation? Like one example is the automobile issue. I don't think quantitative easing had any effect on that whatsoever. The automobile issue seems to be a couple things as far as
supply chain.
Supply and demand happening at once. So at first there was, of course, the supply issue, chip problems, general manufacturing problems from places getting shut down with outbreaks, precautions, et cetera. And then this year didn't really seem to happen so much in 2020, but some point in 2021, and I don't know much how this is actually still persisting, but the more a large minority in the population who are very affluent or slightly more affluent side weren't going to Rome or Mexico, and weren't buying a whole bunch of other extra treasures, and weren't going to shows or doing anything. Yeah, right, exactly. So they had this big they have a problem with not being able to blow their excess cash, and so they wanted to go out and buy cars all of a sudden at some point this year. So that happening in tandem with the supply issues has created this car problem. For instance, I seen one thing on Reddit. There was a new Civic. It wasn't like a base Civic. It was a little more souped up, and a spoiler, and it was
like a 2021 Civic.
Yeah, or maybe a 22 Civic.
Right. Yeah.
They'd be starting to sell those. Yeah, brand new Civic. The MSRP was like $42,000. That'd be real dollars, not silly dollars. And which is pretty high for a Civic already, but it was like a fancier Civic and all that. Right. It was the dealer selling it for, I can't remember the exact number, but over 80. Let's say 82, in contrast to 42.
Right.
Now that is just incredible. And there was just one thing I seen on Reddit, but as anybody knows, that's what is generally kind of occurring. Like somebody could have found that could be a highlight of like the extreme.
Like, but you'll pay full price for a 2-year-old car.
Yeah.
Like where they say, that a car loses half its value if you buy it new, drive it off the lot, and that sort of conventional wisdom has been completely suspended now.
Yeah, no, exactly. And people, and a lot of people just a lot of people with more money, they'll just go out and pay, maybe $100,000 for a Lexus and just not really give a shit. Whereas I imagine they'd regularly be probably 85 or something like that. And so, yeah, there's some things where I don't think quantitative easing is playing a role. I think that's an extreme example, but overall with the general inflation, and it's getting, people are getting more and more concerned, and it's becoming more and more of a talking point. And I'm worried that there might be a lot of hysteria starting to go around it, because when I actually look at the inflation numbers, they're not really that bad. And if you take it over the course of the last 30, 40 years, it's pretty close to the mean. So how much overall do you think that for inflation of everything that the quantitative easing has had an effect, and how much is it more supply issues?
Yeah, that's the $64,000 question. I mean, I
only deal with expensive questions.
If we go, if we go,
it would have been because of inflation, it would have been a $20,000 question 4 years ago, but now it's $64,000.
And so now, But we had, when we had the great financial crisis, over a decade ago, we had much of the same discussions. The difference now is one, the massive supply disruption, which we managed to avert through quick action a decade ago. But the other thing is the sheer size of the monetization of base money printing, or not printing but pressing a button and numbers appear on the screen, basically. The sheer size is an order of magnitude. So you can't do that kind of quantitative easing, I don't think, and there not be some sort of effect, not some sort of consequences. But where is that bearing out? Is it, and and it comes to, how do you want to define inflation? Do you want to do it the traditional way of the general rise of prices, of the prices of everything going up? We're seeing a little bit of that, but not a lot. We seem to be seeing a whole lot more of what we saw a decade ago, which is like asset prices of reinflating stock prices, and with this, housing prices, and those things. I don't. Those things look a whole lot more sticky than your TV, your stereo. But I mean, you get your TV and your stereo from out of the country, off of the continent, and some of those like supply chain disruptions are probably going to be permanent.
Oh, so
Um, because the Biden administration seems to be uh, about as hardline as on China as the Trump was, with just softer rhetoric.
yeah, and then it's been so much shorter in duration, but I don't. Biden hasn't done anything yet that would be comparable to uh, Donnie's trade tariffs and all of that yet.
He hasn't put on any new ones, but has more or less stuck with the tariffs that were in place.
Okay.
Surprisingly enough, and I think it's because Biden doesn't seem super ideological to me. He seems to put his finger in the air and do what he thinks the majority of his constituents want.
Mm-hmm.
And the wind is blowing against China, and it appears to be bipartisan. So he seems to be going with that. And so I think China being factory to the world is in question at this point. And like we were talking about earlier off air, there's a good chance a lot of that final assembly stuff will migrate from China. Some of it to the U.S., much of it, could easily go to lots of other countries in South Asia
Like
and
Indonesia.
the Pacific. Yeah. And from their perspective, China's loss is their gain. So they'd have nothing to lose. They would have more economic activity and more trade with the West. So it's possible we may be importing some inflation that way, and maybe some of it will be sticky. But as far as like goods are concerned, and even things like energy and food. I mean, energy is its own thing. I mean, energy is very, very strictly supply and demand.
Mm-hmm.
And OPEC made a decision recently, is trying to restrict supply, and it's working out for them so far. And so I don't think quantitative easing is necessarily increase the price of energy. That seems to be something that's happening on its own, and energy feeds into everything else. And so it does. I guess my point is, it doesn't seem energy, at least, doesn't seem sticky, but energy can affect everything. But it can just as easily snap back. You can when prices are close to $100 a barrel, you've got tons of prospectors, fracking companies that are like, oh wow, it's profitable to drill a whole bunch of holes now. and they're probably all out there laying the groundwork. And the pipeline for that is a year to 2 years. But to set up expanded operations, and at that point, the cure to high prices is high prices.
So now is the are the because the high energy rates, or as far as our neck of the woods is concerned, has been more of a recent phenomenon. Is that's going to have the correlation with any sort of manufacturing that's gone on locally because of and many other services. So when energy goes up, the cost
Right.
of everything else that has anything to do
Producing,
with energy.
transportation, yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
So
Right.
are we going to start seeing further inflation?
But is that being fueled by money printing? I don't know. Because to say it's fueled by money printing is saying that money printing is artificially increasing demand for energy. And I don't think that's the case. I think demand for energy hasn't changed a whole lot. What has changed is the supply and distribution. And overall, that is going to lead to higher prices. I don't think that in itself is necessarily permanent or really a direct result of the quantitative easing. Asset prices, everything from stocks to real estate to Bitcoin, I think is a whole lot more closely related, because I'm sure BlackRock employees are maybe buying a couple more Cadillacs and Mercedes nowadays, but they're not investing in Mercedes and Cadillacs. They're just, they're going out and buying them from themselves because they're making a ton of money, because the Fed basically said, hey, BlackRock, I need you to spend $1 trillion for me. And BlackRock's like, well, okay, but we're going to have to charge you for it. But what does BlackRock do? They sink money into equity and real estate and probably freaking Bitcoin. I don't have any proof of that, but I have strong suspicions.
Now, is there so within, because I think the energy situation, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, there is a bit different in Europe, but here, what interest is there for Canada, the United States, to go along with the high OPEC prices? There'll be revenue generated where there's oil production in Canada, in the United States, but if it inflates so much else, is there really that much interest in maintaining that, or should they be trying to push for
interest by OPEC or by non-OPEC US and Canada?
Yeah, like would they be in a position where they could try to perhaps pressure OPEC to change their present policy that's causing the high cost of oil as it is, or could they even do anything about that?
I don't know how much direct pressure they can have on OPEC other than just undercutting them, but it seems like historically OPEC's greatest enemy has been themselves, where they try to everybody counts on everybody else to hold back production, and all it takes is one defector, and then the next company or next country goes, well, I'm not going to hold back on my production while Iran over here is making all the money. I'm going to ramp up production too, because it's better for me to make less per barrel but sell more barrels. Mm-hmm. And so OPEC has had a hard time restricting price. And I think it's getting worse now because North America, at least, is not as dependent on them as they used to be like 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And so, we can undercut them just by accident, just by prices being so high that um, fracking companies just go on a drilling spree.
Mhm. So then another problem, if uh, cost of goods stay high and energy stays high, it it's that those both can only stay so high, where the large segment of the population that are at the poorer side that are going to start really getting pissed off, and then there's going to be, one would assume, some sort of political incentive to try to
Right.
address that. Right? And that's all, a lot of people are already feeling the crunch on that end. So how long can this actually persist until it's sort of standing aside and just seeing how bad it can get?
Right. Yeah, even if everything, evens out just fine in the long run, how long is this long run going to be? And those are big unknowns. Because they could feed on each other, and because so much of what prices are driven is as much by narrative as by anything else.
Mm-hmm.
Where a perceived shortage of toilet paper can cause empty shelves everywhere,
Right. You have the
even though supply hadn't changed.
right. You have the toilet paper bank run.
Right. So in that case, it's possible that you could have like um, an inflation narrative that fuels inflation, the whole inflation expectations thing that was beaten to death, I thought, in the 70s and the 80s. I'm kind of doubtful in that production capacity around the world keeps going up at a very steady pace, but it doesn't look like consumption is going to keep up.
Mm-hmm.
And so, both production and consumption are going up, but consumption, the acceleration of consumption is slowing down relative to production, and
Oh,
on a global scale.
It is okay.
And so that's going to have depressing pressure on prices.
Mm.
I mean, on an extreme scale, we have houses in Japan that are just falling into decay because there are not enough people for the houses, and the people that do own them, it's no longer efficient or reasonable to spend resources keeping them up if they're not using them. And so um, that pushes prices down even further. But Japan is, a pretty extreme scenario. I like looking at Japan because that's where uh, China and Europe could be in 10 or 20 years.
Yeah, that's sort of the forecast, and a lot can change there, or who knows what will
But yeah,
happen.
it'll
But yeah,
change slowly though, because I mean, you can say, "Hey, everybody, get busy now," and they put on the Waka Chicken music. But it's going to take 30 more years to generate someone who's going to be, your new consumer who's going to be buying the stove and the house and the
Mhm.
diapers and stuff. Maybe diapers may be a great index, especially if you track on who the diapers are for specifically. Are they for young people or old people?
You have to keep track of which brand of diaper.
Right.
Yeah, yeah, and it seems China's tried to address that. I don't know well enough by getting rid of their child policy quite some time ago, but that's going to take quite a while to correct, and there's still these
Right.
huge different generation gaps.
Yeah.
And I don't think Europe's really sure what they're going to do. You seem to have, like, it's not like they didn't have the problem where there was some sort of top-down infringement upon how many kids people could have. It just sort of it's
Kids are a
become,
liability,
well, it's
especially
just
if you live in a city.
yeah, it's I think there's two things that have affected children. It's just it seems to be this after product, and it's all so new that nobody's really sure what to do about it. But part of it
Yeah.
is an after product of liberalism, that people have more control over their lives, and they just consciously want to have less children. And then and the other thing that I wonder about is that might actually be less of an issue if it just wasn't so expensive to have children, and how the economic tides have changed since the 70s or whatever, that it's become the status quo that all the middle class and lower people, you need both people to have jobs. And so then so there's, the choice that people can make under liberalism, but then there's also an incentive where if both people need to have kids, then it's just even that much more burdensome to have children. So
You mean if both people are working,
that's correct.
that having kids is
is that even that much more costly and burdensome? So there is
that's like been long in the making, and now that
and it keeps getting
we're
worse.
in the error of our ways, but it's going to be a long time to unwind if we ever do. I don't know. We might. Yeah. Our economics, and I'm careful not to use the word capitalism. Just our economic system has been based on growth, and because that's all we've ever had is growth. Barring large wars or plagues, the human chart of population and productivity has just been going up and to the right for the last 700 years or so. And now we're coming to a point where that may not be it may not be wise to assume that on into the future forever and ever, amen. And what is a post-growth economy? And I don't even mean slowing down growth to combat climate change, but just growth slowing down just because demand is slowing down. What is that going to look like? And it's I can only akin it to Star Trek, where they see some sort of wormhole or anomaly, and there's no way of knowing what's on the other side of it until you go through it.
Okay, when you said Star Trek, I thought you were going to refer to the 24th century post-scarcity.
Right,
which we're very,
where demand isn't
very far away from. Yeah, exactly. Where supply isn't really an issue.
Right,
and then that has to change the nature of demand, which all of the latter century Star Trek of Next Gen and Voyager and such doesn't really address. It's like they make it clear that supply is no longer an issue, but they don't really it's not clear what the market for Picard wine, how that works, because Cisco's father's Cajun restaurant.
Right.
It's not clear how those work in the market. They're just there. There's the Picard wine, and it gets made.
I wonder,
and then and Cisco's dad has a restaurant, but how does people don't have money, and there's no. So is it just like there's as many restaurants? You'd need a lot of people who have labors of love for restaurants, which is kind of already the case. A lot of restaurants just sort of get by, and some people just love running a restaurant or a bar.
Right.
And
that's my impression.
They're putting a ton of work in and a huge amount of risk, where the amount of gain they can get from the risk has
Maybe
a ceiling.
the,
But it'd be
yeah,
hard to
maybe it's-
imagine. It'd be hard to imagine that you could have enough restaurants just sort of because without currency, you could maybe think, well, there's just as many restaurants until people attend and people just like go to a restaurant and then they just make them food.
right.
And then the supply network set up under the United Federation of Planets through the technology just gives the restaurant anything that they want to make the food, and then they just have to make it and have the door open and the lights turned on.
Right.
And so then people can come in, but then you'd still think that there would be more people wanting to go to restaurants than there would be
Right.
restaurants. Doesn't seem that there'd be enough people wanting to open these restaurants, or maybe that isn't the case.
Maybe if you don't have to worry much risk, and
if there is no risk,
operating costs are so low that
they'd be zero because the Federation would just take care of all overhead.
Because energy and inputs aren't really a concern. You can kind of replicate it. You've got
labor would be the only thing you have to manage.
Right.
Yeah. And then so maybe there would actually be way more, and all these restaurants only ever have like 4 people in them at any time because there is
right.
So and then Picard, I think the Picard wine one becomes more interesting is, so I sort of thought about this, and there was a book written on this about like the economics of Star Trek, but there's a lot of things that weren't addressed. So I thought maybe
I'd love
like with niche markets such as wines, or I'm trying to think like specialty items and even luxury items, that it's just sort of you get them if you're like you get them if you're proximal. So maybe you couldn't buy Picard wine in Indianapolis. You could only buy it in I don't even know where he is in France, but let's
Bordeaux. We'll say
let's say Bordeaux or Marseille or wherever somewhere close by, only in that region of France, or maybe even just that town, or maybe some other towns. And it's just sort of wherever you live, wherever there's the closest person, which would be, and then many people could make the case that that would kind of suck, because then like here in Saskatchewan, under those circumstances, like I would never get my hands on Lafroig or Buffalo Trace or something like that. I'd have to.
I don't know. I'd think that there'd still be trade. I'll trade you a bottle of Romulan ale for some of the Picard stuff, and if you get way out there, to buy the stuff on Deep Space Nine or something, then you might need some gold pressed platinum to get the deal done.
Yeah, there's still trade, and that's I don't even understand how that works even. But there's trade still between different governments. Like there's trade between the Federation and the Klingons. Or the Romulan ale is different. That's black market because it's actually illegal. The Romulan ale, I'm pretty sure.
Is it?
I'm pretty sure that's how they
on that.
I'm pretty sure that's how they run it in the show. Okay. Is that like, I have some Romulan ale. Like,
it seems to be like
because that would be like trade
illegal, but nod, wink, wink.
Yeah, it'd be like Cuban cigars.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Or you guys can have Cuban cigars now, right?
I don't think so. I'm not sure.
Still not. Okay. Well, at least 15 years ago and well before.
Right.
Yeah. But
you could get them.
But that's sort of a separate thing. But there's trade between these other. I don't even know how that works, but that's that can totally be tabled. But I guess with like specialty items, then you just sort of go back to like trading chickens for goats in a way. Is that
right?
Like you just.
Well, from what I understood, they work on a credit system, and they. In the sense that they had some sort of unit of account of your share of resources. And I always thought of like the Federation is a fairly loose Keynesian sort of economy where money is created when necessary and to suit, or credits are created to suit the size of the economy versus the Ferengi, which are total Austrian, and they love their hard currency, and it's there's a very limited supply, and what you have is what you got. And if somebody finds a latinum filled asteroid, I don't know where latinum comes from, but presumably there may be a new silver mine or a new gold mine or the latinum equivalent, and when you have that just fucks everything up, because all of a sudden, because you have like zero control over the supply of your money. It just expands whenever somebody discovers a new deposit.
So then internally with the credit system, how that it seems like a lot of it would have to start moving away from Keynes and towards Marx, maybe in the fact of like how, because unless everybody got the same amount of credits, it wouldn't really resemble their economy. It would just look more like ours, when they sort of make it clear at points, not even within Picard's era, but Kirk's era too, that they work for meaning. Like it's sort of Jordan
like there's
Peterson's
some sort of UBI going on.
Yeah, it's sort of Jordan Peterson's utopia. Everybody lives their life for meaning. Meaning. and that's just sort of
right.
that seems to be what they go off of, is that they don't have ATMs and stuff.
Yeah,
they don't have bank accounts.
That doesn't sound entirely crazy to me.
So if they would all have credits, it would have to be sort of Marxist in the sense that they would all have the same amount of credits, but because of the technology, you don't have the disparity and famine of.
You don't have to worry about food, healthcare, shelter.
So they took care of the perils that we've seen with planned economies.
Right.
So it's sort of like an actual functioning planned economy because of technology. But then you
right.
without the autocratic decision making on, it's like a liberal communism where I guess you can do whatever you want, but your means are taken care of, and it's not a facade
right.
of means being taken care of like under Stalin, but the means are actually right. taken care of because of the technological advances. But then you can be like the guy who works at the Starfleet campus, who's like he's like a philosopher king, but he also just does the gardening.
You can be the bourgeois artisan and run your skill and your trade, and at the same time have all your basic needs met, so you don't have to worry so much about college education and retirement and food and shelter and healthcare. At that point, the Jordan Peterson avenue seems much more viable, because if you look at like video games and video game economies where people pay a ton of money for a skin or something that's completely cosmetic, that does nothing but show off your personality, that's meaning. Mm-hmm. But people are paying their disposable income on that because they see it as worthwhile, and that is like economic activity with decoupling the connection between like mass production and mass consumption and the means of production. A little company just makes a picture of something, a profile picture, and maybe sells a limited number of them, so they have a certain amount of scarcity. But that's where like economies grow inward instead of outward. Because we've got all the cars or transportation we need. We've got all the food that we need. The people that have all those needs taken care of. They spend it on magic swords.
Or what? There's a couple things within sort of the UBI philosophy that would apply to this. There's a few things, like if where do I should just pick one. I shouldn't think too much about where I want to start. But so actually I thought of a bunch of different things that this applies. So the first one is that the concept within UBI is that, or one of them is that if you're given some enough means to get by, that you can pursue whatever you want. And so if you're on some sort of, really right-wing, lowbrow talk show, you'll say, well, everybody's just going to watch Netflix or like study lesbian dance or something like that.
Right.
They'll just come up with some bullshit conjecture to substantiate their ideological presuppositions, to the death. But there is.
But the argument goes that they'll be.
But the argument they can do all sorts of creative things that aren't only productive for them, but are can be productive for the whole of society. Then there's actually a lot here. There's also an increase of productive risk. So if you have a bit of a threshold, there's a lot of extra risk you can take. For instance, there's a slightly more entrepreneurial activity here than over there because of healthcare. So what like a lot of people here sort of forget, in the United States, everybody here is kind of really attached to jobs because they got to make their mortgage payments and their car payments and their broccoli payments and whatever. But it's even so much worse in the United States because so many people are punching each other in the face for a job with a good health plan, which
sends back the movement of labor, which
is just like
inefficient on its face,
a non-issue here. Because if you have a few $1,000s saved up, like even if you're more of a middle class or low middle class person, if you have a few $1,000s in the bank account, you can like quit a job you hate and like try to find a new one or jump onto a new one, or even start up a small business with not much, because healthcare is a non-issue. And so if it's the same with other areas of personal finance, then it would stand to reason that it's going to increase so much more productive risk, as well as a lot of people have a lot of extra little capital to throw around.
Maybe a lot of underutilized, talented, and creative people that might blossom in such an environment.
Yeah, exactly. And then there's another one where, and I see most people overlooking this one, and I think they just haven't thought about it, don't understand it, because I see the dumb left and the dumb right sort of trip over this one. And so the dumb right hate it just because you're giving money to people, and heaven forbid
some of them might be brown.
Or needs it, or they might make their life better, heaven forbid. And then for whatever reason, I don't even understand how they first get to that conclusion. That's still a mystery to me, but it's not like the dumb left are good at being sane or thinking things through. But a lot of people there are against it, although I think that tide is shifting a lot better than on the dumb right, even though a lot of the UBI concepts came from people like somewhat with Friedman, Milton,
right?
Not Fat Tom, where But his idea wasn't as good because he wasn't really concerned about like single moms and disabled people, and it's just like he wanted to give a reverse income tax to everybody, but it doesn't help the outliers that need like a little bit more, which isn't too much to take to help out.
You could do it and then cut off services.
Yeah, you can do it, and he's right in a sense. It's not just savage. You streamline it, you make it efficient, and you allow a lot of people to make their own decisions, and it just sort of helps out everybody. But his was too simplistic, and it would end up screwing over people with like multiple sclerosis or single moms and stuff like that. But yeah, for some reason they want to keep. They either have the idea that everybody on UBI is like Milton Friedman, and even like Charles Murray is a big proponent of UBI, and I think his concept of it is even
Charles or Douglas.
Charles, yeah, the American.
Okay, yeah,
old American, not young Brit. Yeah. Okay. And because he's in is it Cato or AEI? I think AEI.
Pretty sure AEI.
Yeah, and that's a top idea in AEI, and I think they've advanced it for the. Nobody can quote me on this, but I think they've tried to look at it a little more nuanced, where the concerns of people with disabilities and single moms get that those issues get taken care of. But yeah, for whatever reason, I still see a lot of people on the left because they think that things will just fall apart if we get rid of the welfare system. Now, to my point, then, where so many people overlook where UBI is so helpful is that the welfare system, or wherever it's called, anywhere here, it's social assistance, is a brutal, terrible system for most people that are on it. Like, unless you're like really disabled and like there's not much else you can do, and in that case, like, something's better than nothing. Like, people get almost nothing, like just enough to pay rent at somewhere that sucks and enough to buy food, and that's it. And even then, looking at some of the numbers, it's like you're not even sure how people can even pay for that.
Right.
And it doesn't make any rational sense that and for a lot of people who are on it, and this would apply with people with more mild disabilities who can do some work, or even single moms, or like lots of people who end on it, they just had like a destitute life and they're hard, and they came across a rough patch, or they had a rough patch just right out of high school, and they have a hard time getting their life together, and they end up on it.
Mental issues, PTSD, right.
Drug issues, alcohol issues are a huge one all the time. Right. Is that if you earn like even $20, that's not under the table, it's like you're done. It makes no sense. And so much of the
disincentivized to work, even if you really want to.
Well, yeah, you're disincentivized to work, and it's a trap. Like, it keeps people confined in this system, and then and then also there's a larger social disincentive to not want to have this horrible system, because a lot of people then who do have the ability to work, but they're kind of stuck in it, and they still might have drug or alcohol issues or mental health issues, or just or whatever, that it's going to be hard for them to just like get a full-time job, that they'll start doing illegal activities, stealing, selling drugs, all sorts of things like that. Just sort of the idea that, well, these people are, reprobates and all that. So that's why they do all these illegal things. Well, they wouldn't, if they weren't forced into having this, under the table secondary income, and they could learn a legal secondary income, well, perhaps they would have like a part-time job somewhere else, and then slowly sort of ease their way back in on whatever their own accord is. And so, there's all this extra freedom that would benefit society. You have more people in the workforce, in more scattered jobs, part-time jobs, and eventually could work their way into full-time jobs, who are stuck in this system. The system is extremely expensive. So when you actually work it out, it wouldn't cost that much more to pay for UBI, because it would, if you could get rid of something that we're already throwing a bunch of money into, and it's extremely inefficient. Like the cost of getting the single dollar to the person through UBI is going to be so much less, because the welfare system is under this umbrella of this massive monolithic bureaucracy. full of all
Right.
sorts of bureaucrats and social workers
Right.
who are micromanaging people's lives and don't
Right.
need to be there. And that also, I'm not going to get lost on this, but that leads to like a secondary point where I'm really pessimistic about the whole thing, because it's something people don't want to address, is that we got rid of most of the welfare system and brought in UBI. There's an incentive not to, especially with public sector unions, because there's a whole lot of people who lives are dependent on this system,
on that bureaucracy, just for its own sake.
On that bureaucracy, and they're not going to want to see it go, even though it's to the benefit of everybody.
Right.
Broader society, for dealing with criminal activity, for dealing with productive labor force, and for the sake of the humanity of the actual people that are in the system. And so just not even people with like drug issues, drug issues, alcohol issues, like anybody who's like has a disability and they're on welfare, a lot of them could, like, on their own accord, whenever they feel like it, earn a little bit more income here and there, but they're not allowed to.
Yeah, without fear, right?
Andrew Yang had a good he had a good statement once. A lot of things he says is sort of like lame fluffiness, but he had one that was really solid, and it was that bureaucracy is the opposite of humanity. And
that's a nice catchy.
Yeah, and well, I thought it was a nice little slogan that he had amongst a lot of his other slogans that weren't so meaningful, that did completely make a lot of sense. And that's where a lot of libertarians get their more intuitive ire, is that they sort of see that. They just don't deal with it very well and come up with a lot of really great conclusions, but they have that sense that just this bureaucracy is just opposed to their humanity and their sense of humanity.
Right.
So yeah. So if there was a UBI implemented, it just seems that there would be just so much more productivity that could possibly be implemented. And then even if people are allowed to do their own sort of thing, is that what could be conjured up in their creative process if there wasn't as many people stuck within the drudgery of whatever sort of Kafka nightmare.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be willing to bet that there's a million geniuses who are underutilized right now for that very fact, because of for whatever reason they're limited either by disability, or even if they're running a small business and they want to hire people on, but they're hesitant because of being able to support them with healthcare. I mean, and implementing, all that into their payroll system. That's a big hurdle for a lot of small businesses. And imagine not having to worry about providing your employees with healthcare. I mean, how much more facile would you be to making a hiring decision, to hiring just one or two more workers, if you didn't have to worry about that?
Yeah, or I've thought about that too, because again, here the healthcare thing's not a thing. If I think it would help small businesses to hire people because if you have that floor, then people generally they're going to look, okay, this small business is paying nothing, and then this big dystopian company is paying nothing plus one. Well, I got to take the nothing plus one. If they have a little bit extra, it's like, well, they're not paying anything, but I'm already getting a little bit of money in. I'm not going to want to shoot myself in the face working at the small parts shop than I am working for Amazon or whatever sort of small business. There's people already have some means taken care of, so there's the competition for the small businesses with the big businesses or the corporations they're gonna have more edge on the appeal for the job will be less with wage to an extent and more with the
Okay, right.
more with
I'm taking this shitty job because it allows me to pay my credit card debt off, or otherwise I couldn't. Or it allows me to not live in this apartment in the ghetto or something like that, where they're just on the edge.
Mhm.
And what you're saying is a UBI might keep most people further from that edge, where survival is less of a concern, and so they can so other factors other than money become more to the forefront.
Right. And then small
Yeah.
businesses can compete like with having not as much with wages, whereas with just the general appeal of the job through what
Small
the
family atmosphere,
yeah, through what the work is.
localism.
Like you're under less of a thumb. Like if you work for at a
Or
small,
you don't feel like a cog, you know.
well, it's just
You're not
yeah,
alienated from your labor, as Marx might say.
yeah, or even just if people look at it frankly, like anybody can run the operation in their mind. Just think about it. Where would you rather work at? An Amazon warehouse or Bob's Flowers? You know,
Right.
everybody would
And
take Bob's Flowers. You know,
right. If Bob is a known quantity, Bob is a decent guy, and he
that's right. There's gonna be
gets
some
drunk on
Bob's
weekends,
Flowers.
but usually he's
Yeah.
you know what you get with Bob. And
That's
with
right.
Amazon, they could change their contract on you. They can put in a new manager who's wanting to get, squeeze out every bit of efficiency.
Well, and they analyze your daily efficiency down to the nanosecond, and it just
Right.
it's just pure evil.
Dehumanizes. Yeah.
But yeah, you could have certain Bob's Flowers where Bob is a creep. He's an ass grabber and an alcoholic and runs a shady business. But then you just go to Fred's Flowers, and Fred is like Flanders.
Right. And so yeah, I mean, there may be less, incentive for the Bob sort of personality when Ned Flanders can compete better.
Yeah, and so it just the general point then is that in part money will still be a factor, but then at least that might push the big shitty evil jobs because they're not going anywhere to actually then have to pay more because they're going to want because people aren't going to be as desperate as much to want to have to work at one of those places. So at least if you're working in one of those hell pits, that might boost up wages and then the smaller businesses aren't going to want to have to compete because as long as they're keep a chill atmosphere, they're nice people, it's going to be way more appealing than working for Walmart or Amazon or whatever sort of big juggernaut of depression.
Yeah, absolutely. And from the consumer side, I'm noticing a much more artisan movement because, just about everything you can buy on Amazon or Walmart by definition has been commoditized to the point where it doesn't have a whole lot of ding. I can't do that. Ding! There we go. But it doesn't. And so it made room for the whole Etsy community.
And people generally like that. I think a lot of people it's something that's been around for a very short period of time, just sort of the Amazonization and IKEAization and Walmartization of product.
Right.
And that's like something of, well, people not much older than you would remember when that wasn't a thing,
or not so much of a thing, but now it's warp speed. Yeah,
and it's been very short that's been the state of affairs and status quo. And I think if people remove their brains from the bombardment of marketing and advertising and the fact that that's just the norm, they look back and say, oh yeah, just like with a lot of people that have consciously are repulsed by these sort of commodities, like I can see that like the more artisan items are much more appealing than the horrid junk that people buy en masse, which also doesn't last at IKEA and Walmart and Amazon.
Right. The value in the long term really isn't there, and people are seem to be much more willing to pay for value, whether it's Etsy or it's Whole Foods or even just
When
restoring
people
an
were
old car.
before, even when people had less money, that was people. There is the before people would be drawn to things that last and things that are of quality, but it just with the
Yeah.
ramping up of cheap mass production through the changes in technology and globalization, and then
Right.
and then hoodwinking people into thinking that they're buying good products when they're buying
This brings us back to China.
complete dog shit. Yeah, we're coming back from China.
I mean, it's like what quality piece of merchandise at all, comes from China? What if in Germany you got cars and stereo systems, right?
Oh, more knives.
Knives, sure.
Oh, Germany. I think in Germany, that's the first thing.
Okay.
Just
Okay.
nothing but everybody needs German steel in their
Right.
kitchen.
Fine. Okay.
But
I think
yeah,
it's
yeah,
Swiss
yeah.
or Japanese, but yeah, I mean, yeah, we've got all
Germans. I'm standing up for the Germans on this one.
All righty.
Yeah, the Japanese have been doing good a lot more lately, but
Right.
it's the Germans. But yeah. Anyway, yeah. What'd you say? Cars, and I said knives. You said something else.
Yeah, stereos.
Really?
I just think Blaupunkt. But,
okay.
And there's,
okay.
I think there's a couple more, but I'm pretty sure Blaupunkt is huge with a bunch of sub brands that they. But.
Right. Yeah, and there's yeah, I forgot about. There's a lot of good stereos out of France too. Japan is really the big one, and then the Americans.
But is there any sort of product that China has cornered the market on quality? I don't think there's a single one.
Maybe now they bought some. The only thing that I can think of, and I'm not too sure, but I thought of a maybe. That's about the best I can do. After the financial crisis, like Volvo had all sorts of troubles throughout the years. Even making really quality stuff, they'd have all sorts of sales issues, and they'd always bring it back. But then they had.
You mean quality would suffer, or just sales for whatever reason?
Sales for whatever reason, because they didn't really jump on production. There was such a focus on quality, and so much of it was there, like with safety and efficiency.
Right.
They kicked the shit out of everybody for decades on those two factors. Right. But
it's a long game.
Yeah, but and sometimes, and back to what we're generally talking about, lots of time shit sells. So Volvo wouldn't do so good, right. But Chrysler would, even though Chrysler is just like the Dollarama of cars.
Right. Yeah.
If anybody out there want to buy a Chrysler, fuck you.
I don't know anybody.
You're an idiot. Don't buy a Chrysler.
Maybe they want a Jeep, but yeah, that's about.
But you have to buy a Jeepy Jeep. If you bought anybody who buys one of those Jeep Cherokees, I see those on the road. And I'm just like, you have to have a brain injury. I've actually gone out and bought one of those. Oh my God. Anyway, so yeah, Volvo had some issues, and then they eventually sold to Ford, and then financial crisis happened, and GM dumped like Saturn and Pontiac, and so I think I'm pretty sure it was Ford. Maybe I got Ford GM mixed up. Whoever bought Volvo, but yeah, Volvo got dumped. Like just the car, right. the big the truck end of Volvo, I'm pretty sure stayed in Sweden, and they'd sort of split into like two different companies, and so the Americans bought. Mm-hmm. The car end, and then they had to dump it, and then this Chinese company bought them, and they still make but they're still made in wherever, I think Gothenburg, so they're still made in good old Sweden, but a lot of them, but the Chinese Volvos are made in China, and I haven't heard much about them, and I think there's a lot of design that's starting to move over there. And I think the Chinese are really pushing the Volvo initiative. They want to get onto all electrics by I think 2025. So
5-year plan.
Yeah. So that's the only thing I can think of is that China hasn't ruined Volvo quite so much. And
not yet.
Yeah.
But yeah, how long have they had Volvo?
Since like just after the financial crisis. It's like
Oh,
2010,
okay.
20,
So
2010 or so. Yeah, it was this
a little
big,
longer is than Disney has owned Star Wars.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Long enough for it to go to crap, you know.
Yeah, long
And it hasn't, or we haven't heard that it has to a
yeah, no,
great degree.
and it didn't, and a lot of there's still a lot that's done in Sweden, and a lot of people on board, so I don't know, but yeah, there's a lot of Chinese involvement
Right.
there.
So China may still be on the final assembly part.
Yeah, and
maybe
like,
it's a bigger deal. A car is very complicated sort of thing. Not anybody can put a car together.
Yeah, and when they were bought by the Americans in the early 2000s, like they pumped a bunch of money into it to get up new lines of vehicles, and they came out with the XC90, the SUV and stuff like that. And there was a lot of crap that was pumped out then. There was some good stuff, but there was a lot more crap than the crap to good proportion was much different than would have been before. And I don't know if it's so much the case now. And they're still really safe and generally, I'm not sure how on reliability so much. I'm not as much up to on the new ones, but yeah, Volvo hasn't gone. They're not like Chrysler,
right?
So there's that. So yeah, that's the best. That was a very
best
long,
example.
That was a very long answer to get a maybe.
To say, yeah,
to get, yeah, that's the only thing I think of. But yeah, and a lot of it, it's not like, and I think a lot of people who are really defensive about China are crossing our arms and saying we're being mean. And to grant that concession, a lot of it, I don't think is just so much that the Chinese aren't good at making good things. They are.
These things take time. I mean, Germany had been spending about a century, making automobile engines. And it's an iterative process. You got to go. There's a learning curve, like a generational sort of learning curve.
Well, I think a lot of it, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I think just a lot of it has to do with the demand. Is that's just sort of how China became the manufacturing hub. Is just the way it's like the West wanted. It was just everything was undercutting, cheaper. And then the Chinese said, well, we can do that.
We can play that, yeah.
And we can play that game. It's not going to be good, but we'll make you a lot for nothing.
Right.
A lot. So I don't think there's ever been a demand for anything good to come out of China. And they wanted to grow up the economy. And whereas the Japanese and the Germans,
they built their economy by undercutting everybody else.
Yeah. Whereas the Germans and the Japanese sort of like were helped to.
We make the quality that you can't get anywhere else.
That's right. They already had enough after they were rebuilt after the war by their former enemies, and they had more of a stable economy, and they had I guess they would have had the ability to have focus on quality and then undercutting everybody by buying things you can't buy anywhere else. You're not going to buy a Mercedes anywhere else, or you're not going to buy a Marantz amplifier anywhere else, whatever.
Right. So they have the pricing power where people will pay more for it because that is the high end mark for whether it's Lexus or BMW or even an iPhone. And iPhone is a good example because
I wouldn't throw BMW.
Yeah, I'm not too enthused about BMW.
No.
They're okay.
Let's stick to Mercedes.
But China makes about $25 an iPhone, and roughly about half of the cost of the iPhone comes from importing all the different products from, whether it's motion sensors, touch screens, memory components, capacitors, etc., from all these other little countries, and they all come to China, and China assembles them. But China takes about $25 of, your $1,000 iPhone, and Apple takes about $400. And so, yeah,
Is that
400
how much
bucks
is
freaking
that?
profit. Yeah.
Is that how much they cost? Or and then
That's how much
yeah.
Apple makes after cost of goods sold. Is like 400 bucks a freaking iPhone. Yeah, it's insane. But why do they get it? Because you can't get Apple quality anywhere else, and because they can. They could charge $600 for the iPhone, but they charge $1,000 because people pay for it.
Join the resistance, Scott.
Oh my God. Josh is showing me a flip phone in a camera. It looks wow.
The cave phone. Look at it.
Knock, Neo.
In all its 10-year-old Korean glory. Thank you, Korea. But yeah, that's right. They can. And
right. And so I'm pretty sure Apple could move their iPhone assembly wherever they wanted. They could even move it to the US. It make a more expensive iPhone, but I don't think Apple cares. They'd be like, okay, people will pay it. And
don't those sorts of companies have to care? Like, don't shareholders get grumpy and start raising?
They do, yeah. Well, I mean, they'll find the cheapest place to assemble it for the same quality, and that just might be the U.S. Chinese labor, isn't nearly as cheap as it used to be, and if the quality had kept up pace, it would be worth it. But like the quality that you get for the cost that ratio is getting smaller and smaller, to the point where if you don't already have business set up in China, it's not as a no-brainer as it was 20 years ago or even 10 years ago. So it's, in that sense, it's there's a whole lot more incentive now to move that operation out of China, whether it's the U.S. or Vietnam.
So with the tensions increasing, then how come that's not a thing, or is it just?
I'm pretty sure it is a thing.
Okay, and is it just? It's just gonna.
Like, I mean, the Trump tariffs on some of the Chinese products just caused that production to move to the Philippines and Vietnam, and they were quite happy with it, just because it was just, for them, it was like a zero sum. China's loss was their gain, and because the tariffs were aimed at China as opposed to aimed at the actual product, like whether it's tires or whatever it is, that didn't have so much the effect of moving manufacturing back to the US as just moving out of China, wherever that would be, where it was cheapest.
Okay, I just had to go feed the cattle and the chickens there for a second. So, okay, how did we get on China? I can't remember now.
We were talking about a movement towards artisanship and individuality and away from commodification, and none of that spells any good news for China.
So then there's still a large degree of dependence, and one would think that American and European, more so American than European, I suppose, political bodies might be aware, maybe they don't want to think about it, that things can go awry as a result of military circumstances in China and around China.
Right.
Could be in a year, could be in 10, could be not at all. If there's not the dependence that there was 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, why don't they just make more of a conscious decision to just push things abroad, take maybe some short-term losses in with supply or even just input costs, and just preemptively take care of that, and then just circumvent the concern altogether of a more what very much seems to be a more capricious China.
I'm confused about which party is doing what now.
Oh, okay. Well, if there's just not a necessity as much, if there's not as much of a reliance as I thought on Chinese manufacturing by its biggest consumers, being
where it could change and it may not be that big of a disruption.
Yeah, like
Right.
Why not preemptively address it and then move things abroad, so you can have more of a gradual change, even though it's
Move
not gonna
things
be
abroad.
out of sorry, not abroad. So that's where
Move things out of
are.
China.
Right. Yes.
Right. Yeah, I think there's been a lot of that already. If for any other reason, just because of the uncertainty, because you don't. I mean, if you're like a Western company and you're using China for some of your operations, and Trump comes in and Trump's got all this hard rhetoric on China, and you're like, oh well, I don't know if I want to, open up this factory or sign this contract with China.
Mm-hmm.
And so it put a clamp down on future moves, and and that's been 4 years ago already. And the latest president doesn't seem to want to be reversing any of the Trump administration's decisions vis-a-vis China. I don't see why any business would, and labor costs are going up. There's a whole lot less incentive for any business to try to outsource them, any of their operations to China as opposed to another country.
What does that mean for China then in the future? That would then be a concern for them. So I wonder what they're thinking, or maybe they just don't have as much confidence that there is actually going to be that much shift, or if they do have a plan for an invasion of Taiwan, and they would have to calculate. I'm sure they have one plan on the table where they're going to call Washington's bluff, and that not much will happen, and they'll do as they wish
and get away with it
if that is their plan. But then they would have to have a game plan on if they try to call Washington's bluff and they don't blink, then
oh shit.
And then it seems like it seems like the actual military engagement would be less of an issue than how it would affect trade. That's just how I've been thinking about the
every
issue.
Which way.
That's just how I've been thinking about the issue more over the last few months. And I was thinking, and you seem to have, I shouldn't say less concern. I just was extremely uncertain about the situation. But my concerns were both ways. Is that neither would want that, mostly on trade, because what would China do if they get cut off from being able to be the international manufacturer of so many goods, but how it would also affect their consumers. But if their consumers are less concerned,
the consumers would be pretty mad.
Or no, I meant
like,
sorry, the
like
external
Chinese consumers or consumers of Chinese product.
The external consumers of Chinese manufactured goods that get exported.
Yeah.
So, but you're outlining that may not be as so much of an issue, but then also it goes the other way. What would be the plan in Beijing if there is sort of a long slog that doesn't necessarily have to go nuclear, but just still becomes, or even it could be this situation of
like massive internal propaganda campaigns and mass surveillance.
Well, I'm sure there would be some escalation of that, but like even just say that, let's say
I'm just saying that I don't know what else they could do.
no, as far as their economy, like what would like what if, let's say, they invade Taiwan, or something else happens that causes some sort of actual military engagement in the Pacific, and the Brits and the Americans and whoever else falls, and the Japanese and whoever follows along with them, it just sort of cuts off China, and just sort of it becomes more like,
right.
A lot of people are talking about Cold War too. It's so
Right.
there's the military and political aspect, but what makes it so much different than the actual Cold War was that we weren't buying,
we didn't have those ties.
We weren't buying so Russian made hatchbacks.
Right.
Or put it into H.
They tried the Yugo car for a little bit, and that went over like a lead balloon. And that was different. They were like sort of they were the one communist. Yeah, I think they sold energy, and that was about it.
Oh, there was still energy going into across the Iron
Russia to
yeah, but okay, actually,
but
beyond that, there wasn't really the trade. So it's sort of a weird Cold War. It's like we're threatening to blow each other up, and there's all these really hardline political tensions and concerns about war, and even concerns about nuclear war, because not are just China and the Americans players in this, the Indians and the Pakistanis are also players in this. Right. But we're still just like, it's like we're pointing guns at each other, but it's just like, hey, do you want to buy my sandwich? Oh yeah,
right.
It's sort of
it's more like a drug deal where guns are definitely part of the picture, but there's also big money to be made.
Yeah.
So the risk is high, but if I didn't have to go to Big Lou for my hooch, and I could get it from this redneck from Kentucky, and he makes it better, then I'll probably just buy it from the guy in Kentucky.
Mm-hmm. Right. So then back to, like, if there was some sort of military conflict, and then Japan, Britain, maybe but Japan, Britain, and in the United States for sure, essentially have an economic divorce with China. Like, what would they do? That's something I can't understand or foresee. And then
would buy it from somebody else, buy it from any other country that would jump at the chance to assemble iPhones. And
no. The other way around. What would the Chinese do? Not what would the Japanese and the Americans and the British do? What would the Chinese do?
Oh, and that would be bad.
It's just something I can't wrap.
It just looks really, really bad. In that, one,
can they move away from
economic lifelines would be cut, and or at least disrupted, and so they wouldn't be producing as much. They wouldn't be able to basically this middle class that China's created of several 100 million people that have gotten really accustomed to much of the accoutrement of Western life, of modern media and internet and TVs and boy bands, and that's going to go away when you've got energy crisis and water crisis and food crisis.
Let's just try to stick on. So let's say there's not an energy crisis. So let's say that, however the military frowning turns out, is that China is able to get themselves into a posture to say, where if you start cutting off our energy trade from the Persian Gulf, It's like, we're going to escalate this and it's going to get really out of hand. So let's say for whatever reason that they don't end up having an energy issue. They're still getting energy from the more western parts of Asia, as well as.
It's like kind of, I don't know. I mean, it's like, well, what if Saudi Arabia fucks with China? Is China going to nuke Saudi Arabia?
But yeah, I'm just trying to stay away from
any bit player can get in and screw stuff up. Go ahead.
Even just, I'm just even just on the angle of them having to re-coordinate their economy on manufacturing exports. If so much of that goes away, if the Japanese and the Americans and the Europeans and
stop playing ball,
and the Commonwealth say, we'll make our own stuff, or we'll get the Mexicans to do it, and the Indonesians.
That just sounds like a massive lowering of the quality of life of a couple 100 million, middle class Chinese that have gotten used to their.
And so would the party just rather do that and then just try to pump out as much propaganda to keep everybody at bay, or?
It seems like they're running out of options at that point.
Like sort of the idea with the first Cold War.
They have no choice but to clamp down, and the more they tighten their grip, the more star systems will slip through their fingers, I'm afraid.
So that's like with the first Cold War, there was the idea of, that after the Second World War, just military technology has gone up so much that the great powers, there won't be a big war between them, which is a Turkey problem, I think. But that was sort of the idea, is that everybody has so much military power, and even besides the nukes, is that the great powers aren't going to go head to head, and then that never occurred. Maybe it seems now that like the economic ramifications are so large as a result of global trade that was just sort of what I've been thinking about over the last few months. It's just it's hard to see how there would be such a large war, since nobody wants to see any of these trade avenues cut off. Whereas with the First and Second World Wars, like the big deterrent seemed to go into the Second World War was just only body count. Is just like, okay, we didn't see coming what machine guns on scale would do, and that wasn't good. And so people were worried about body count, which it wasn't enough to stop the war, because Hitler didn't care about body count, and then that ended up occurring. And then
body count probably led to it, because Europe was so traumatized after World War One that any belligerent or even resistant move to Hitler was often called out as warmongering, right?
That's right. Yeah.
And it was, just 20
years.
Yeah,
you could say it could cause it, because those concerns and people being too passive allowed Hitler to get bigger and bigger, and then the war just ended up occurring anyway, as Hitler wanted to. But yeah, that was just sort of the idea that people were wanting. Hey, we're not going to have another world war because tanks and machine guns are just in airplanes with guns are just. This is okay. This isn't the Napoleonic Wars anymore. It's not just muskets and cannons and horses. It just the
post World War II, right after World War II, the thoughts at the time is we can't keep doing this.
Yeah, and then it was just sort of the same, but escalated after the Second World War. It's okay. Now we have better planes and aircraft carriers and nuclear bombs and better machine guns. It's just like this can't. The war between great powers will just be too cataclysmic, even just beyond the nukes. But now it just seems like there can't be this new major war, because nobody wants to have to deal with trade disruptions,
because we're making so much money.
Yeah. It's just we're so dependent on goods and energy worldwide that it's just like everybody, it seems, would lose by so much by week 3 of World War III.
Right.
Just
Right.
like where there's no war, and it's like there's already
everybody acting rationally.
Already the Germans are like, oh, if we're gonna have enough gas for the winter, I don't know.
Yeah.
You know.
Right, and assuming everybody's a rational actor, that seems to be a good thing that might prevent war. In China's case, the scary part is the regime, the CCP is so paranoid, not even so much of the outside world, but of its own people, that if you put the squeeze on them, they may do something stupid, just because they've got less to lose. Mm-hmm. Like, if we don't do something, eventually the Chinese people are going to get sick of us, and they tolerate us. From the perspective of the CCP, the people of China tolerate us because we're doing okay now. This isn't a great leap forward. We're creating a middle class. There's some people that that have nice things. Not everybody, but
they've had massive economic progress.
We've had
quality of life since the 80s. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And as long as we keep delivering that, they're happy, and they're not too worried about the fact that they can't criticize the government.
And like
that's how we like it.
And like with every country, like there is, as after with in the early 80s, when they moved more away from hardline Maoism, there is still a focus in China, from what I understand, of the party representing the country and the culture and the people,
right.
And there is and there's going to be some contentment with it, because
and in that sense they're very right wing.
That's how I've looked at it. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And there is, they are consolidating levels of national pride, and also every country is susceptible to all forms of jingoism.
Yeah, and China especially, I think, just because that's been drilled into every Chinese citizen and leader since the get-go. And I think even now, their military has to spend several college credit equivalent of studying Marx and Mao theory, and just political philosophy that's 100 years old, that they're required to do because, well, that's what we're supposed to do. We're communists now. Mm-hmm. And we're supposed to do all this, and if you're going to be a good Chinese, you have to learn Marx, and you have to learn what it is that makes Chinese communism with Chinese capitalist or characteristics function and work. And so it's like they've tied Marxism, or at least the idea of Marxism, not I don't know how much it is Marxism in practice, but the ideals to their own nationalism, to their own detriment. I think I don't think it's a good idea to have your military officers studying Marx for a year. Mm-hmm. Yeah, give them a couple of courses on it, whatever. But they should probably be studying, other things.
They seem pretty shrewd. I imagine there is a lot of that. But just as a side note, another thing that I find interesting is sort of required reading and understanding now in modern China is also Xi Jinping thought as a school of philosophy.
Yeah.
And that's getting kind of
cultish, creepy.
And creepy.
Yeah.
But back to I don't know what
and I'm wondering what the average Chinese guy thinks about that. I mean, Mao,
no idea.
Mao has a big old body of work that people study all over the world to this day. Xi Jinping, I don't know I don't think anybody knows very much about his body of work. I mean, it's not like he's a Twitter influencer. I mean, what of anything profound has he authored
Why don't
that would merit that cult of personality other than just manufacturing it for its own sake?
Well, yeah, on its own, nothing, I would imagine, but it would be for the sake of him wanting to organize his own cult of personality. Right. And then the big question would be is like how, like I've seen this sort of broadcast, but how much impact does that actually have within Chinese society? It's like, you know, state media is going to broadcast things about Xi Jinping thought and all that and make it.
How seriously do they take it?
Does it seem important, but how much amongst the average Chinese people? Like, is this just sort of something that they say, oh, okay, and then, you know, just sort of roll their eyes?
They say because yeah, right. How much do they roll their eyes to it?
Yeah, and then how much, and how much of it
do they do it to the degree that they did in Czechoslovakia, like we were talking earlier?
Yeah. Whereas the government starts to crumble and the whole thing falls apart because everybody just
the dam breaks.
Yeah, because everybody just went along with it, but nobody bought the bullshit.
Right.
And so with that, and I think that gets sort of, I've seen that broadcast a bit is sort of show like how severe things are getting in China. And, you know, that shows how severe the intentions of Xi Jinping are, but how much are the Chinese people actually buying? And it could be zero, or it could be a lot. I have no fucking idea.
I have no fucking idea either. Well, I've got the only idea I have is from talking to certain Chinese nationals, and they all are, from my perspective, fanatically nationalistic. They firmly believe that China produces the best quality products of anywhere in the world, which is clearly a canard. But I got the sense that they genuinely believed it, that it's not that they're just some talking point that they pay lip service to just to make nice with the powers that be, that they at least for that part they really believed it. And they also, you know, seem to have a very high confidence in the Chinese military and authority to exercise power in their neck of the woods, including the South China Sea. And so I think there's a whole lot of evidence that the Chinese believe their own bullshit, and even the CCP believe their own bullshit, and may even believe their own numbers that frequently turn out to be bullshit and can frequently be proven to be bullshit from outside sources. But they believe it because that's what the official numbers are, and they don't dare question them. And when you get to that point, yeah, which is worse? Believe in your own bullshit to your own, which is obviously to your own detriment. I mean, if you can't trust your own books, if you can't trust your own accounting, if you can't even trust your own counting of the population and who's having babies and who's not, which they've screwed up terribly, and some of which we hadn't found out until just this year, or is it worse to not believe their bullshit, to just, you know, everybody's giving it lip service until there's a missionary who says the emperor has no clothes, and everybody's like, yeah, we all knew that, and the dam breaks, and, you know, you get Czechoslovakia. I don't think the Czechoslovakians at the time believed all their own bullshit, right?
Oh,
I think they repeated party lines because they felt obligated to, but once they didn't feel obligated to, it all fell apart.
Yeah, there'd be a lot of that in East Germany as well.
Yeah, right.
You know, a lot of different places, but so it seems at the point where there's not enough going on where the Chinese people would actually care enough to try to push for some sort of change. But if
As long
there
as the
is,
spice flows.
yeah, exactly. So if there is an economic decline, and the party sort of calculates that, it's like, well, we'll just address that. We'll contend with it through repression and propaganda. Oh, will that work or not?
Right.
I just
Well,
don't.
that just sounds like a last resort because they got no other option.
Yeah,
Right.
and
I'm pretty sure that CCP sees that economic prosperity or continued prosperity is like crucial, foundational to the survival of their own regime.
And there's another thing going on, and I'd like somebody who with very and looking into some works to read up on this. Nice to find somebody to explain this to me more in depth. I think there's a lot that's going on with the actual CCP, the party, and with Xi Jinping that I just don't know or don't understand enough. A lot of this is quite new to me, and so there's so much about what could happen in the future has to do with what actually the people in the party want and what Xi Jinping wants. I think that's less of a mystery. I am remembering now a lot of this we talked about on air, but I'll take a lot of what Xi Jinping says on face value. But what I've heard is that even when Xi Jinping made himself president for eternity or whatever, that might not actually be the case, and then at next year's party congress, there might be people who want to brush him aside. What's actually going on there, I really don't know, but I've been hearing that from serious people that might actually be something that is wanting to be pursued by members of the party that don't see eye to eye with Xi Jinping. And if that sort of change happens, then everything that everybody's concerned about now might completely be brushed aside. And if Xi Jinping gets sort of just nudged out the door, and they get somebody else back in, they can.
Would that like radically change party policy?
Well, I'm assuming, I don't know either. I'm going on a big assumption that and maybe there's something completely radical as well, but different, that opponents of Ping within the party, or Xi Jinping within the party, are wanting. But my assumption was that they want to go back to what they had occurring within the 90s and the early 2000s, was the one China policy, but not acting on it too aggressively, and having a good relationship with the United States and Japan.
Right. And growing fast and making money, and sounds great.
Especially Xi Jinping's intentions seem more and more clear, and I really question anybody that brushes this aside, is that that he seems to be really wanting to risk war with Japan in the United States. For the sake of taking Taiwan. So I would imagine that there's a lot of people. And again, I just don't have enough of a comprehensive understanding of what Chinese sentiment is within the PRC, of how they feel towards Taiwan. But maybe there's some other people that don't have as much sentiment towards Taiwan and see that escalating these sorts of conflicts.
Are they true believers in that they just fervently believe that Taiwan is a fundamental part of China, and China is not whole without it?
Well, they could be, but they could just be saying that I'm more concerned about not having a military conflict and good trade relations with the United States and Japan.
Right. The money is too good. Why rock the boat?
Essentially. Yeah.
Right. Which to me sounds like the rational action for the party to take. And I think the only reason why the party would deviate from that and actually escalate conflict is if they got no other choice, or if they feel like they got no other choice, if they feel like that there's a threat from within, if they don't somehow shore up nationalist fervor with some, a great struggle.
And I don't see that either. And I haven't, and that could just be counted to my ignorance, but I haven't heard anything where it seems to be that they really need to solidify national unity through those sorts of means. It seems like people are a lot more content. But again, I don't know how much actual demand there
Right.
is within the public for more of a sense of national unity and more of a sense of showing that China can accomplish their pursuant goals of the unification agenda.
I think the party sees it as a whole lot more important than your average Chinese citizen. As far as the Chinese, regular Chinese people, I'm pretty sure they don't want the gravy train to stop. They want to be able to buy a second house or move off the rice paddy, move into the city and make some money. And if that stops, I think maybe the Great Leap Forward was an aberration in the sense that you can only abuse your people so much before they've had it. And it's possible that they got away with it because at the time, Russia was the greater enemy. And so the U.S. just didn't want to step into internal Chinese politics and let them figure it out themselves.
I don't think that
now,
I don't think the Americans cared. Well, I should say Washington, the American government, people like yourself care, but it seems like a lot of U.S. foreign policy post-war was self-interest. They were perfectly fine with selling weapons to the Indonesian fascist military dictatorship to slaughter the Timorese, but they would step into certain conflicts when it was in their best interest. Right. And it just didn't seem. It just seemed like they had already, that Kissinger had accomplished the agenda that they wanted, was just to open up trade, and they didn't really care about anything else. And they also had
trade would help drive a wedge between China and Russia.
Yeah, definitely. And it just seemed like that was the end of their interest. Like they wouldn't have cared about anything else.
They don't care about starving Chinese citizens.
Yeah, or just a lack of personal freedoms, or whatever you want to fill in the blank with.
Right, but would that be the same now? I mean, if
then just another note, like just there'd be contentment within the people. I'm assuming in China is just that internal repression is just went down starting in the 80s, and they live by 2010. They're just living in a whole different, better world than they would have under Mao during the Cultural Revolution.
You think there was a marked difference repression wise and not just economic?
Yeah.
Okay.
I maybe there's something I'm missing. I would think from Mao to after their economic liberalization, then it's still not a free, far from a free country in so many ways. But yeah, there was even like,
but you had
in 1975, they would be like wearing the party uniforms and on their bicycle, and then by 2005 they're wearing sneakers and t-shirts and jeans.
and buying and selling real estate.
Yeah.
Where before they couldn't do that.
Yeah.
And so there's a certain amount of freedom that that came with that affluence. I'd grant you that on that level.
Yeah, so
And so
I think their discontent would have been going down since the post Mao era,
right.
and starting in the 80s, and so
I guess my question is, how tolerant would they be of that if that whole thing went in reverse now?
Yeah,
especially when they had the taste of the good life. When there's hundreds of millions of Chinese who are living a middle class life and wearing sneakers and playing video games.
And that's a great question, to which I have absolutely no idea whatsoever.
Will they be as yeah? Will they be as willing to make that long march as they did before?
And then there's also the matter of, there's what lengths would the government be willing to go? Because what we see with certain places, and as we were talking about before off air, like above Stalin or Saddam Hussein, the Kims are just they set the bar. It like you can go to any level to have control over everybody, and they set the bar for repression. And so
the bar for what they can get away with too.
Yes, for what they can get away with. So it's, would people start having discontents, and would the government try to counteract that as much as they'd want to? And that's.
I think they would, but could they? Could they hold it down? Could they just hold a lid on a discontent Chinese people who've had a significant loss in their standard of living? That's a big question. I don't know, but I think the party would view that as existential, as in do or die, and that sense of precarity in the party could incentivize them to do something crazy or something that you and I would find not so rational.
Yes, absolutely.
And that's the scary thing. I'm pretty sure that even though I'm pretty convinced that the CCP, to a certain extent, buys their own bullshit and believes their own numbers. Otherwise, they run themselves like the mob, where they have two sets of books. And if you got two sets of books, all that's got to happen is for somebody to get that other set of books, that secret set of books, and publish it like the Panama Papers, and that'd break it wide open. That's possible, but that'd be a big conspiracy that'd be hard to keep down. So that's what leads me to believe that they believe their own bullshit numbers and the bullshit numbers that are derived from their bullshit numbers.
Mm-hmm.
And so they could have an economic crisis simmering right now under the surface that they're even the top people are only dimly aware of, and something could blow up, like financially or energy wise, which is we're already seeing some buckling in those areas.
Yeah, that brings me to something I was want to ask you. What do you think, or if anything, about what's going on with? I forget the name of the company, but they're major real estate investment firm.
Evergrande.
Yes, and them struggling to make their
looks really bad.
Not even they're not even paying off the debt, but they're just barely being able to pay the interest.
They're dancing.
They're the regular interest premiums.
Right. Yeah. We're running out of chairs to sit on.
So let's say they just go. What effect does that have on the country? Because that's like that. Hundreds of billions of dollars they have is what the country the company is floating.
Right. Yeah. So, and it's leveraged to the hilt, and it's like it's like the husband with the gambling problem who hides all his debts and financial problems from his wife until he can't hide it anymore, and then everything blows up. It's kind of like the gradually then suddenly sort of thing. I'm pretty sure
then
Evergrande is like a tip of the iceberg.
Okay, but then is the answer similar to the problems we've had? We've had companies become huge and immensely fragile, and then they're too big to fail, and then too big to fail.
Similar
and then the people have to look after them. Would it be the same thing?
Similar in character, but I think different in scale. In the sense that the people fudge numbers everywhere around the world, but there's a higher degree of transparency and checks and balances in America, for example. Like, I mean, you can only fake the numbers for so long before you'll cave in and die. But the China, the whole government is dedicated to maintaining the facade that they're more likely to put everything on the line for what they believe may be a small problem or a smaller problem on the order of what we've seen in the US, but they just don't see how bad it really is because nobody's telling the truth. Because nobody has the real numbers. Even the people who think they are telling the truth are doing it with bullshit numbers.
Okay. I did not know that. That's interesting.
And so I think because of that, the lack of transparency and the lack of trust in being able to trust what numbers that you have, I think Warren Buffett called investing in China as faith-based investing. It look good. You may make a killing there, but not everything is as it seems, and everybody's in the business, or at least government-wise, is in the business of hiding what's really going on, and making the party look good. That when something breaks, it could be a dam break, and you could find out that Evergrande was leveraged 10 times as much as what was let on, and because of the nature of the party, they're going to be, because they invested so much of themselves into that, they'd be less willing to actually deal with the problem. They would just be in cover-up mode, and cover up until they couldn't cover it up anymore. Where, at least in the US, we pretended like the financial crisis wasn't a problem, but we started seeing cracks, like a year before. And then some in 2008, it started looking really bad, and you had Lehman blow up, you had Bear Stearns, and then all of a sudden, the Secretary of Treasury, breaks into the Oval Offices and says, "Look, we need close to $1 trillion by the end of the weekend, or there's not going to be money in the ATMs." And at that point, Bush is like, "Okay, we're going to abandon capitalism to save it." Like, all right, let's not pretend here. All right. I'm not, let's not, all of W. Bush's, self-worth and political capital wasn't tied into whether there is a financial crisis or not.
Mhm. Yeah, with those, then they're too big to fail, and well, are they? Then there's of course those who think that they should have just allowed them to fail, but
Right.
they were able to bail. So are some or is this is
And China can bail.
is Evergrande then too big to bail?
Yeah, we don't know.
Okay.
I don't know if I don't think anybody knows.
Okay.
I don't even think that Evergrande knows.
And so
because the level of trust and transparency is so low.
And so if that's the case, that would I'm assuming that would
be a lot slower to react.
Okay, but yeah, if that's the case, if they can't be bailed and they go, does that I'm assuming
maybe they could be bailed, but they may be slower to react to the point where some real serious damage on the ground happens before anything gets done.
Okay.
And they may be more in damage control mode in the sense of face saving as opposed to damage control of, okay, we got to make sure that all these companies that are operating on credit that, need monthly cash flow, and without it, they blow up and everybody attached to them blows up. We got to do some shit right now. They'd be like, oh no, everything's fine. It'd be like Baghdad Bob, It's like, there are no U.S. in Iraq. We're doing great. We're kicking ass until until the ship sinks.
Right. Okay, I think let's leave. Let's come back to China and all the possibilities that can happen there, because I think it's getting kind of late in the hour.
Sure.
And I think we're gonna have to. We'll leave all the other ones for another day. I think vaccine passports. I think we've had on the whiteboard since day one, but we'll get around to it one of these days. And questions of personal freedom versus public policy and yada yada. Right. But when we didn't really get, we talked about. I think there's a lot more that I want to ask you about. Supply chain issues, and I think we'll just have to come back to that another day. So we're gonna get to vaccines.
Yeah, we went
eventually
off China rabbit hole.
But there's so much that I want to ask you about, like what's going on with like the shipping yard bottlenecks and all of that stuff, and then we could probably tie back to like a lot of the other bottlenecks that happened as a result of COVID stuff, and how that might have been averted, and what else could occur, and what's happening, and et cetera, et cetera. But onto labor shortages, I think let's do that before we bid everybody adieu.
Okay, yeah.
So what do you think is actually going on with labor shortages? So, like, to set the stage, or to set, maybe I'll set a terrible crumbly stage with holes in it and nails sticking out. But similar to the inflation issue, like there's just sort of political mantras and poor inclinations at hand. So like with, it's all this big spending, and it's all the pumping money that's causing it. It's not complex, and a whole bunch of things, and even a lot of unknowns that can't even really be pointed at within a complex system. But with labor shortages, you get the same sort of thing. It's like, oh, well, everybody was given all this money during the COVID, and everybody just wants to play Call of Duty and watch Seinfeld and not go to work and derp. And then that's the answers for the labor shortages, which is fucking bullshit. There could be some of that, but we don't really know. But just having that as
it was a decent narrative like 6 months ago when there was still unemployment.
Well, it was a great narrative for as far as like, getting people to latch on. And there's always been that within, a curmudgeon-y branch of society, and definitely like a really low resolution ideological right of society, where they've always had hostility, irrationally towards people, getting, handouts, use bunny fingers, and just and hating more on their neighbor who's down and out, getting barely anything from the government, not worrying so much about big companies getting bailed out, Chrysler getting bailed out or
Right.
something like that, in hating on
socialism for shareholders.
Yeah, they'll get worried about it if you press them, but they're just perpetually at angst and in ire about poor people getting handouts when it's just so simple. Just get them bootstraps up and get out there.
Yeah, go get a job.
And so that sort of ties into what the narrative was with labor shortages. Like, we're just handing out people and nobody wants to work, and people are just bathing in all this money when that's not the case. And so that would have some impact, but whoa, what else do you think is going on with labor shortages? And we've talked about this before. I can't remember if on air or off air. Definitely off air for sure. Long time ago. But you have concerns about people who are just older and just aren't going back to work for other reasons. And anyway, so what do you think is going on with labor shortages?
A lot of it seems to be, we already had this cohort of boomers, which is a massive generation that is heading into mass retirement, and COVID just happened at the right time as far as boomers go to like put that all on rocket fuel. And so all these boomers on the margin are gonna like, okay, I'm gonna work a few more years, and COVID, fuck it. Or I got sick and I couldn't work. Or I got sick and I died. Or I got used to working at home or working part-time, and I don't, you can take your job and shove it. And so I imagine this old cohort that is the most, in their most productive years, where they've got, decades of experience that come out as productivity, and they've been given a whole lot more incentives to exit the workforce. And so it's bodies that have left the workforce, but I think even greater is the productivity, because young workers aren't nearly as productive. You need more man hours per unit of productivity to get something done. And there were shortages in skilled labor before COVID, but it seemed to be all exacerbated. And people will take the better paying jobs before they'll take a burger flipping job. And so the burger flipping jobs are the ones that are, as far as supply of labor, they're suffering the most, to the point where, and I'll just repeat this because we're recording now, where I, just driving up and down the strip today in Indiana. I was looking for a taco or a burger or chicken or something. And America, drive through. I don't even have to get in. I don't have to get out of my car. I just drive through with America. But damn it, if there were all just huge lines in front of all those restaurants and they were moving slow. And so and some restaurants are like, we got to close on Sundays or something because we just don't have enough staff. And that I'm seeing that all over Indiana, anecdotally, as well as all over the country, the U.S. as far as the news is concerned. I mean, it seems to be a national sort of problem. And the funny thing is, they're raising prices on burgers like crazy. So I mean, we're seeing inflation as far as getting a burger and fries. There, it's 20% more expensive now. but it doesn't seem to have an impact on the lines. People are still going and buying their burgers. So eventually, it looks like that's going to just push the prices of fast food further higher, to the point where maybe they can afford to hire more workers at a higher wage, and ultimately, that a higher wage for a greater amount of people sounds like a positive thing to me over time, because if you've got more people with more disposable income, they're going to buy more iPhones.
Yeah, I've got a couple things to say on that. One thing it just flabbergasts me. It just seems like it just an ethical perversion, is that there's just so much concern about some of these places, like the burger joint not being able to hire employees. It's like, and the wages at all of them are just abysmal, and just
right, and
so
the way they're treated.
Lots of them. Not we definitely not all. There's going to be some.
There are exceptions, yeah.
There's exceptions, sure. But yeah, a lot of them. It just sucks. Or a lot of times there's a lot of manipulation of immigrants too. You get. Actually, I know, right. Not going to get drawn out into some. I've gone on enough long-winded amounts of bullshit today, but I know one in particular where there was a case I know firsthand of, or heard from a lot of people I know that there of a case of a fast food place, really on a personal level exploiting, immigrants in unpleasant ways. But yeah, you'll get a lot of people and they just come over and, they need to take whatever they can get. And, there's the language barrier and opportunity barrier. Like a lot of times with getting jobs, a lot of it's not just, just shifting out resumes. Personal connections are great. If you came here from Bangladesh, it's, you don't have that. And, so yeah, there's exploitative angles to take into consideration, but just it doesn't seem that easy to try to get through some people's heads that some of these places where it's hard for them to find workers, will just, heaven forbid, if some of these places just pay their employees just a little bit more. Like Burger King's not going to see the death of Burger King. It's not going to fucking happen. It's like mom and pop spaghetti restaurant. That's a different issue, perhaps, but it's not going to hurt fucking Burger King. People are flying in.
Yes.
That breakneck pace to buy Whoppers.
And they're right. And they'll pay more for the Whopper.
Yeah, if the Whopper goes up 30 cents, they're not even going to notice. It's just like, just need that Whopper. It's not going to change. And so I just find it amazing that people just have such an aversion to the concept that of these people, of that it being actually a good thing, that some of these places we might be seeing the beginning of a push for them to have to increase their wages through the shifts. And so to see people, pushing out various forms of, ignorant propaganda that it's all, that people are lazy and it's all as a result of these payments that were handed out, most of which just went directly to people so they can pay their rent, so they're not just completely fucked, is just absolutely insane. I'll leave that one there. Could probably just say a bunch of angry words, but I'll just be spinning my wheels. The other one, I wonder what you think. How much of it with like restaurants and Burger King and whatnot is just people, they lost their job or they're looking for a new job and they say, well, I can work at the place where there's hundreds of people coming during this pandemic, which, well, probably our audience is not going to have the proclivity to not going to have to argue with, but hey, it's still going on. Hey, hate to break it to anybody who thinks the contrary, but if you're somebody looking for a job, it's like, well, I can get a job at this warehouse where I'm going to have few encounters. I'm going to work with 4 other people, and it's going to be this big building. There's going to be a lot of times doors are open with fresh air coming in. There's just going to be the odd truck driver here and there coming in
versus a meat packing plant.
I can get a job there, or yeah, that. I was trying to stick with like restaurants, but yeah,
But
packing plants
right,
work.
sure.
Or I can work at Burger King at the till, and I have to deal with 100 4 or whatever 300 sweaty people coming in and out, breathing on me so they can buy their chicken
A
fingers.
closed space, yeah.
Closed space. Which job am I going to want to take? Well, that's the first thing that just came to my mind with all this uproar, and I found it interesting. It's always, well, we have this huge labor shortage, and then whenever I see whatever sort of low resolution member of the right wing commentariat in Canada commenting on it, when they do, or columnist, when they do end up coming with examples, it's always like, oh, I was walking past this restaurant and they had this help wanted sign. It's always restaurants. It's always fast food and restaurants. Well, I just wonder, like,
right,
why nobody's ever stopped to think it's like, well, maybe it's just like the type of work and that the fucking pandemic is still going on. And I've never heard about, warehouses be having trouble finding workers. It's always when you hear these anecdotes about this huge labor shortage.
That's a great
People
point,
just don't
yeah.
have to go to work. All I've ever heard is
just
restaurants.
basic safety.
Yeah, it's just like, well,
Or
maybe
I don't want to take it home to my grandma. Right.
Yeah, or just themselves. Themselves. Anybody, grandma, their wife, whomever. It doesn't seem much of a leap that somebody, there's a few different jobs open, that they're just not going to send their application into Burger King, but they're going to send it into, the warehouse or what was something like that, or go or try to get a driving job or something of that sort, and just anything but the Burger King.
Right.
And so I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on that, because that's one thing I just kept seeing these examples.
Yeah, because that fast food is, it's a meme for a reason, that it's like the bottom of the kind of the quality of job that a person can get, other than other jobs that coincidentally also exploit immigrant labor.
Mm-hmm. And it's also just like the general restaurant, and it's a lot of the uproar has been, oh, well, the restaurant can't open every day of the week, just not just Burger King, but like, say, like
right.
Frank's Lasagna can't open, is having trouble staying open because they can't find waiters, and there's this huge uproar about the payments that were paid to people as a result of the pandemic.
Right.
It's like, well, Jesus, you're so, you're the hill that you're going to die on is that poor people got payments, and then that Frank's Lasagna can't find waiters. Well, maybe people don't want to work at Frank's Lasagna right now because they don't want to be a fucking waiter during the pandemic.
Right. And those payments, to their credit, could have, because all of this happens on the margin, those payments could affect enough margin of people that to give them enough breathing room to, like, okay, I'm going to figure out what I want to do. Maybe I want to start my own business. I've got a few months of unemployment through the government, where I can start a business, or I can just retrain and look for a better job. Where otherwise they, a lot of those people, probably most of those people in those fast food or restaurant jobs in general are living hand to mouth. They would find another job if they could, if they had enough time, if they had enough, resources in their life. Many of them, are working multiple jobs, or they've got kids to worry about. There's a whole lot of demands on their time, and the unemployment assistance was enough to give them a little bit of breathing room to set a longer term strategy than what their paycheck is going to, are they going to have food on the table next week? Mm-hmm. So in that case, it freed them up like a UBI freed them up it freed up labor to move a lot easier than where it would be before. And also for somebody with a great idea to start their own business. And when you start a business, um, it doesn't quite bear out as jobs created, or at least not right away.
Mm-hmm.
And those sort of statistics may lag a year or two before we actually see what the results of those are. But back to restaurants, Chipotle, is raising wages for everybody. Just because they have to, out of necessity. They need workers, and so they're paying what the market will bear. And I just pulled up this CNBC report, and it's fairly recent. What is it? It's from June of this year. Chipotle estimates that they're going to have to hike menu prices by roughly 4%. 4% for like an extra, a couple dollars an hour to somebody is
so the workers' livelihood goes up, and the bougie twats that are stupid enough to go to Chipotle have to pay
right
a few quarters more for
everybody win. I mean, yeah, but you're raising the wage of those workers by a hell of a lot more than 4%.
Yeah.
And I mean
because Chipotle would have taken the calculation. It's like, we can't completely bump up the prices that much, but we'll bump it up a little to offset all these wage increases a bit. And yeah, they're so profitable that they're going to be able to bite into their profits to just pay their employees more than the depressing wages that they're presently paying or were previously paying.
Yeah, I'm not even sure. I'm not even certain of how much of their profit they're going to have to eat. If they only have to raise menu prices by 4%, I think they could have raised it by a lot more than that if they needed to, and I think people would pay it, and maybe they will eventually. But the cost benefit as far as the worker concerned, it just seems to be outsized, where they can get like a 20% pay raise. And on the other side of that, people have to pay 4 or 5% more for their taco. It sounds like, I mean, that's a win for the consumer. That's a win for the laborer. And it's a win, I believe, for the economy in general, because if you got more people with more disposable income, they're going to spend it. But that's something that doesn't happen unless it's out of necessity, because for each individual company, it's in their interest to pay as little as possible in labor costs.
Yeah,
that's just the way it works.
It's been decades of undercutting, and and just sort of the ideology of just cheaper is better, as far as we can go.
Right.
And somehow that's great, and hopefully the shift sticks, where paying a little more for where it matters can sustain itself.
I think it can, but only if everybody does it at once. And it took an event like COVID to shake things up, where everybody has to do it at one time. Because, on an individual level, it's rational to pay as little as possible. But if I know everybody else is paying more, then I can afford to pay more, because if everybody else is getting paid more, they're going to come into my restaurant and buy more tacos.
Yeah.
So, eventually I'm going to make up for it in volume. So, and let's get back to inflation now, because an argument for the inflation of the 70s, and there's a whole lot of circumstances that are different now than what they were in the 70s. I mean, that's where the baby boomer generation was just coming of age, and where they started buying cars and stoves and houses and diapers. but it was at least in part it was labor driven, where the cost of labor would go up because inflation went up. You'd have a cost of living adjustment, and those cost of living adjustments were a lot more rigid in the 70s because you had more regulations in place and stronger union power where they could do it and get away with it. But those when those wage increases became baked into the cake and they became expected, then companies would have to charge more for product, which would raise the prices of everybody buying them. So they would consequently ask for more wages next year, and it would just, pile up on itself. But the difference then is the demand pressure was a whole lot stronger than it is now. So how's that going to work out? Well, I mean, we're going to have inflation in prices, but it's possible that the inflation in labor is going to be smaller, or is going to cost less, and is not going to propel prices at the speed that it did in the 70s, because the demand isn't keeping up like it was in the 70s, because we don't have that monstrous cohort of boomers coming of age. We've got the millennials now, and they may save us from the no growth trap. And they may give, at least the U.S. and Canada a couple of decades of breathing room to figure out what are we going to do when, our growth slows down and we have less and less babies. I mean, that's coming. We're doing a little better than Europe is, but that Reaper's going to knock on our door eventually. Mm-hmm. Unless I don't know, unless we have maybe a big childcare benefit that makes it possible, or makes it easier to have children and still have a quality of life.
That still seems like it would be best case scenario a bit in the future, and then it still takes a long time for that to catch up with the population. It seems to be very long term, even at that. And it seems so much of a struggle to have some sort of
right. So we may have a big gap.
It's still such a political battle to have better childcare and more childcare benefits that already, and a lot of it is just even on the grounds of just helping people at the bottom for more right. of to have better consumers at the bottom, and as well the more humanistic egalitarian reasons, much less to have more of a natalist objective to be acquired from it all.
I think the natalist objective would be more appealing to our right-wing friends.
Yeah, but they'd want to do it through more. There seems to be
go forth and be fruitful.
Some of that going on the U.S.
You gotta have babies somehow.
Yeah, but it seems to be that they would want that, but I think they would do it through cruder means. Just sort of more so
banning condoms.
Yeah,
right.
Wouldn't fuck it from some. Yeah. Wouldn't surprise me, but more so like
that might do it. Yeah,
punishing the childless in a sense. Taxing the childless or something.
Right.
Something fucking dumb, like something really really short sighted like that. But in the meantime, what if the boomers are all retiring early, and over the next 10 years, what's that going to do for
they're going to spend less. The boomers are going to spend less, and the millennial generation, your generation is barely going to be enough to take up the slack for the gap in spending that the boomers have, because when they retire, generally when you retire, you spend a whole lot less.
Well, and we're already poor for our age, and bereft of assets and all
Right.
of that.
So maybe this wage increase is coming at the perfect time, and it seems like it's not going to drive.
But my eternal pessimism is worried that this is more like, this might be a blip where there's a bit of a wage increase and then it just sort of settles out and nobody's really concerned about the broader implications and the lessons learned around labor during the pandemic are quickly forgotten, and there's an urgency to try to get back to the model that existed in 2019.
Right. Okay, everybody get back into the pit.
Exactly. Because it's so ingrained, and that's the pattern
right.
that we've lived since the 80s and the 70s, and it just.
But without the glut of labor, they're not going to have much of a choice. It's hard to tell, people to get back into the pit or get back to flipping burgers if they got a choice, if they got if they manage to take 2020 and take some night classes and get a better paying job. It seems like the balance is swinging to an extent in favor of labor. And the fact that Chipotle is only going to have to raise menu prices by 4 or 5% compared to the 10 or 20 or 30% wage increase that their workers are going to get. That doesn't spell to me an inflation spiral like what you had in the 70s.
Now, what about? Now, this doesn't help Japan. I don't know what the hell the Japanese are thinking. That's
robots.
They'd be thinking robots before this. What about immigration? Is there going to be an incentive then? It's like, we just really don't want people. We just don't care about people. We just don't want to have to pay these people more. For God damn it, right. I just can't sleep at night if somebody's making $16 an hour at Burger King when they could be making $12 an hour, like they should be at Burger King.
Right.
Let's ship them in, and then so maybe Canada and the United States and Germany.
Well, who's going to make that case? What political party is going to be? I mean, you'd have to split the Republican Party to the populists and the industrialists, who are like, the industrialists be like, we need as many Mexicans as possible. And
that's already the case.
But the Trumpkins are going to be like, hell no. So I mean,
well, as far as the United States is concerned, the Trumpistan has an iron unmovable grip, and so like the old.
It looks like it's here to stay for a bit.
The Frums of the world. And please keep them. Who you sort of the old guard. It's already sort of split, and so maybe you could call them the industrialists. Maybe they would want to make that case. But yeah, the American context and the Republicans. But it maybe within the liberals here, the Democrats.
The
here,
Chamber of Congress came out against Trump. Which which has been a bastion of the Republican Party for as long as I can remember, and there's a major split there, and
they've already moved. Like there's the Lincoln Project people. They're buddy with the Democrats, and
right.
And as mentioned, the members of the Commentariat, the David French's, David Frum's, Bill Kristol's. They're
exactly
they're
Are they coalescing to a new liberal party?
Well,
liberal in the more European sense.
Well, I'm not even. Eventually they're going to. Their idea is still to get back the Republican Party. In a time sense, it still has been really short. So their idea is still we can get the Republican Party back from Trumpistan, which I don't think is going to happen. It could happen.
Yeah, I got doubts.
I always have my reservations to forecast anything. You never know what's going to happen, but it's just that it's just moved
hard to
so
imagine.
so quickly and so strongly towards Trumpistan. And so I think what eventually is going to happen is the David Frums are just going to move. They're already so much closer to Joe Biden.
Right.
They're going to, the Democrats are just going to move more to the right again, more than Bill Clinton. And it's already with
right, because
with the Biden Democrats, it's already a right wing party, and there's already so much tension between the AOCs and the Joe Bidens that there's a schism possibly brewing there.
And the left end is even getting disillusioned with AOC and Elizabeth Warren.
And there's fracture there too between the left that are, I think the only thing that's broadly within the left everybody agrees on is more foreign policy, but there's more of a fracture between those worried more about class issues and then those more worried about shitting on Israel and mythical genders and stuff like that. And so there already seems to be some fracturing going on there. But and then maybe with that sort of discontent that the sort of center right Democrats like Joe Biden can keep up their status quo. But that's a whole other question.
They look like the winners, huh?
Yeah. They're just more unified, the Pelosi's and the Bidens. Right. But I think that the David Frums are just gonna forget about social religious issues and sort of give up some foreign policy leeway. And there's already been that shift. It's like the Democrats seem a lot more hawkish now, and there was so much inward looking protectionism within Bannonland and in Trumpistan. That's just the area. So much has shifted around, but that'd be an interesting thing to sell back to. But I just wonder if that just is going to be an avenue that they're going to look to try to quickly resolve labor shortages, is just bump up immigration levels.
I got.
And if it's like the Democratic, if it's like the Democratic Party or like the Liberal Party of Canada, it's already it's an easy sell in a social sense. It's warm, open, welcome, and a lot of immigration has its benefits. And one drawback of immigration for the rest of the world is Canada and the United States. We've stolen so many good doctors from Nigeria and Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, and wherever. But
all the smart Indians are here.
Many are are in so many places, but India. So maybe that is something that they'll find more favorable. They have their lobbyists, and they're saying, well, we're having all these labor. So
you're
the
talking
cost of we're having these labor cost issues, and we really don't like these labor cost issues. And we've been so used to paying people nothing. We really like paying people nothing. So can you bring in some people that we can pay nothing?
Right.
And then that gets it.
Right.
And that will be if that is the case, then that will get really interesting, because then there's so many people.
They'll have to get it past the populace.
Well, and then if there's anybody opposed based on labor cost issues, for the sake of having higher labor, it's already a contentious issue. Whereas if and then for a long time this was a left issue to be, a little bit reserved about immigration and to not be, xenophobic and opposed to it, but to have constraints because of that specific issue. And then just things sort of moved around. But now within the social milieu, it's like no matter what the context is, like if you say anything against immigration in any way, even though it's not against the general concept of immigration, it's you know what sort of darts will get thrown about as a result of that, and so
yeah, well, like you're either Trumpkin or you want open borders.
no, it's either you love immigrants or you're Hitler.
Right. Yeah.
It's like
yeah,
that's what the dichotomies become.
Not much room for subtlety.
Yeah, so within my very cynical mind, that's what popped up is if the labor issue persists, it just seems like there's an incentive to it's like, well, we have this population gaps and all that. It's like, well, let's just bring them in.
It's just
and then we can go back to living how we were in the beautiful paradise of 2019. Everything was just so wonderful.
Yeah, true. And capital has its own way of revolting, and they've got more resources and levers available to them. Unless, like you were saying before, it gets a chance to catch on, where people see a benefit in it. It's like, oh, well, we got lots of people with a higher standard of living, and they've got more disposable income, and they're buying more shit, which means my company makes more money.
Right.
I don't want to pay people more, but if my pie is bigger, I can't complain. I'm making money as an industrialist, as the one with the capital. More people are buying my widgets. Then wages are just cost of doing business, and business is good, so I can't complain.
Well, that's why you're here. You're the smiley sun, and I'm the cloud.
Right. Yeah. That could happen. And does that necessarily mean inflation? I don't think it does, or I don't think it does to the degree. It certainly doesn't to the degree of Venezuela or Weimar or Zimbabwe or something like that.
Well, I think that goes without saying. Is because
I wish it went without saying, but
okay.
Jack from Twitter.
Well, now you're the frowny cloud, and I'm smiley. Okay, because I started hearing about that quite a while ago. It's just like people were really cavalier with throwing around the word hyperinflation, and I every time I'd hear that, I'm like, do you actually know what you're insinuating here?
They don't,
and like what that word actually means. Like 9% inflation is not hyperinflation. That's just 1987. Hyperinflation is this, like, we have no economy and we're printing out money as fast as possible.
Right.
And then you get Hungary and Germany and Mugabe.
Right.
And Maduro. So
we're not even close to that. And the 1987 is a nice perspective. I actually remember 1987, and you could buy a Coke for 50 cents. but
like then there was times when there was inflation at
9% wasn't. That was a Tuesday, and now we get
and it was just into the 90s that it dropped down to low single digits, and
we get a year-over-year spike, and people are freaking out of a couple extra points, when in the long run, if it's persistent, this could be a different trajectory. This could be a change in trend, but you don't see that yet.
But you alluded to that. It my idea was that it was just impossible, because when looked at hyperinflation, it's always just mass printing of money,
not a chance,
and there's no economy. Oh, okay. You sort of alluded that there might be a chance of something possibly that
not hyper, but maybe a 9%.
Oh. Okay.
Maybe a 9%. I really doubt it. but I certainly leave room in that for a possibility.
Well, I think let's leave that there for today. So I
Sure.
think
All right.
let's come back to. I think we'll have more to say on labor, and yeah, there's a lot we didn't get to supply shortages and what's going on there, much less everything else. And I think I'm going to write down next time what I was wanting to talk
Okay.
about was mentioned at some point, and we've talked on here a bit before, but what's going to happen in the next U.S. election? Because I was just looking at some polls, and well, first, Donnie is now way ahead of Biden in the betting odds. So that's one thing. So the betters
Oh,
are going,
really?
the betters are going Donnie. He was
Okay.
behind Kamala before.
I think I'd want to. I think I'd want to take the other side of that bet. But yeah, cool.
Okay.
Interesting.
But, so for a long time, it was Biden was way in front, and then Kamala, and then Donnie, and then
Donnie
DeSantis.
was below Kamala.
Yeah, and then DeSantis, and then they were pretty close for a while,
Okay.
and then he was closer to Biden than he was to Harris, and now he's well in front in the betting odds, and it looks like they're doing polls for the prospective Republican primaries. It's just Donnie ahead, no competition. Like there's so much rhetoric of, oh, maybe Nikki Haley will get in, and of course there's like DeSantis, and it's just like everybody's. You look at the graph, it's just like the differences just look like nothing between everybody else, and then it's just like Trump at like 45 or whatever.
Wow, that's a whole lot to put on one 80-year-old guy.
Well, look at the other 80-year-old guy,
Right. Yeah.
So not even like well, he wouldn't even be 80 then, and Biden is going to be 80 right away. Actually, 80.
That's uncharted territory, because as much as it's hard for me to imagine that Trump could actually cinch it, because he's getting older and lots of crazy things could happen between now and that election. Just health issues.
Yeah.
But on the other side of that, it's hard to imagine Biden having a second term, or his vice president having a second term.
Yeah.
So 2024, it looks like just a wide open field of primaries of both parties. And
I think the biggest factors as to who will be, I think it's the first time, the biggest factor on who will be the leader looks like at this point, but there's all sorts of different political things that could happen that would drastically shift that. It's naive to say that it's definitely going to be Donnie versus Biden, and with Donnie having a bit of an edge. Like so much shit can happen between now and then. Yeah. Just like in December of 2019, it was looking like Donnie was good for winning the second election, and then Mr. Virus crawled out of the woodwork and is put itself upon us, and that changed everything. So how much stuff can happen in that time, but yeah, it's an interesting situation where the two most likely candidates are Biden and Trump, and beyond future political unknowns, the biggest factors of keeping both of them out are just ill health of octogenarians.
That's so pathetic. Yes, the leaders of the free world, and
it's like, will Biden have dementia by then, and will Trump's heart explode from Big Macs by then?
Right.
It's like those are the big issues, but so we'll come back to
awesome
to Trump and Biden and what could happen there, and how either their two different policies could affect what could go on going forth. maybe something interesting will happen with Bannon by then. Yeah, let's leave it there.
Right. Okay.
Thanks for listening to the show, everybody. There'll be more episodes coming for you in the future. Be sure to check out endcoronavirus.org and worldhealthnetwork.global for more information on the organization. Thanks to Michelle from Make Good Together for doing the graphics for the show, and a huge thanks to Tracy, the noble producer of the show. If you listen to the show on either YouTube or podcast format, well, they are available on both, and be sure to like and subscribe and comment on those. All the best. Until next time.